Yeah, so can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. And I can see Mr. Sweetman. And I guess he can see me.
I can see the chairman, and I can see you, sir. Yes, I can see both of you.
Excellent. Well, Mr. Sweetman, you were giving evidence yesterday, and you're going to continue to give that now. I'll pick up where we left off. We were discussing towards the end of the day acceptance incidents and the workshops that went into it. And you were briefed on the progress of those acceptance workshops as they were progressing. Is that correct?
Probably. I think the record shows that. I don't recall that.
And we were yesterday discussing one of the acceptance incidents, which is number 376, concerning data integrity and discrepancies in the cash account. Yes?
Yep, we were.
Now, eventually, in the second supplemental agreement, Post Office and ICL Pathway agreed, in respect of that incident, that between the 3rd of October 1999 and the 14th of January 2000, the percentage of cash accounts received across the TIP interface with discrepancies should not exceed 0.6%. Do you recall that?
I don't.
Yesterday we discussed that you looked at the bigger picture when considering whether an error rate was material.
Yes.
Did you listen to the evidence of Mr. Copping earlier this week?
I haven't.
Well, this was put to him, this agreed rate of 0.6% for the rate of discrepancies. And it was put to him that when applied across the entire post office network, that would amount to cash account discrepancies, 100 cash account discrepancies in any week, which he considered to be quite a significant error rate. Would you agree with that?
I suppose I'd have to compare it with the pre-Horizon error rate that arose within the cash accounting system, the old manual system, because there were, I don't know the number, but there were lots of errors coming out of offices which had to be corrected. And there was a team of people in Chesterfield who picked up those errors, analysed them, and did what was ever necessary to correct the records. That sometimes was adjustments within head office. Sometimes it was going back to the office and say, can you do this on the next cash account? And that will bring it back into balance. So, and I think there were, sort of dozens of people in Chesterfield doing that correction process. And they would have the capability of handling that level of errors because it was common practice. So that being in place would have given me personal comfort that that low level of error rate that we had defined in that agreement you quoted was handleable. And I think that's what I would have assessed the issue as.
Before moving on, I want to, again on this point of materiality. So from your, I think what you're saying is from your perspective, this error rate was past the materiality threshold which you were applying, and you would be happy with that level of errors. Yes.
Well, you're never happy with any errors, but if you can handle them, that it doesn't undermine the completeness, the truth and fairness of the record keeping, then from my perspective as a director, I will be happy that we are running an accounting system under control, because we can pick up the errors, we can correct them and move forward.
I think
So I was looking at
yeah,
it from a organisational basis, not a sub-postmaster basis.
yes, and you said yesterday that the perspective from a sub-postmaster within who was affected by one of these errors would be different. Was anyone within post office counters representing the interests of sub-postmasters at this stage?
Well, the whole management structure, from what I've read, and I think I remember, we had an organisational structure where maybe 50 post offices were looked after by a retail network manager, and during this implementation phase, we had specific managers with that sort of line experience, holding the hands of, and looking after the sub postmasters who were going through the implementation. They would have been there on the spot, seeing what was coming back and what was causing errors in the local office, and helping the sub postmaster respond.
So I think we're talking at cross purposes.
Sorry.
I'm discussing the considerations that were taken into account for whether this 0.6% figure was material. And in your evidence yesterday, you compared the different perspectives. On the one hand, from your perspective, you're looking at it for the post office counters as a whole,
yes.
And on the other hand, for an individual sub-postmaster who would be affected by an error. Now, when considering this level of errors, I say in that context, was anyone at post office counters representing or considering the interests of the individual sub-postmasters in respect of that error rate?
The honest answer is I can't remember, but I suppose that was down to all of us. But no one specific had that hat on to say, in this meeting, I'm representing the sub-postmaster. I don't think that was in place, but I really do not remember, sorry.
I think you may have answered this already, but just so the question's put to you, are you aware of anyone seeking the views of sub-postmasters on that issue?
We had lots of feedback routes from sub-postmasters. At national level, the General Secretary, the President. At regional level, there would be feedback mechanisms, and there would be mechanisms down in sub-postmasters and in the regions. So there would have been various lines of communication. What those specifically were about this error type, I don't recall, sorry.
I want to jump now to January 2000. Please can I turn up POL 50336. This is a meeting of the Post Office Board held on the 11th of January 2000 in which you attended. Please could we turn to page 11. Could we go further down, please? Sorry, can we just slightly further up? Actually, sorry, I'm so sorry. Can we start on the page before that? At the bottom. Sorry for the delay there, Mr. Sweetman.
That's okay.
This concerns an update on the Horizon programme, and it refers to the rollout of Horizon being due to recommence, and that a great deal of work had been undertaken to rectify difficulties identified in 3 areas: system stability, accounting integrity, and the provision of support to officers. Although as yet uncertain, it was anticipated that these issues would not prevent rollout recommencing. I can go over to the next page slightly, please. Given that the programme was expected to recommence rollout, it would be helpful for the board to understand what marketing opportunities were now being considered.
Yeah.
Now, do you have any? I understand you don't have any recollection of this meeting.
Not the specific meeting, no, but I can read the words and I can interpret.
So at this stage, were the board asking you any directed questions about the accounting integrity issue which we've been discussing?
The minutes record. So this board meeting would have been earlier in the month, prior to the recommencement of the rollout, and the board would have had a report, which I'm not sure if I've seen, which was said we're working on these issues, and if those issues are satisfactorily resolved, we will recommence rollout. I don't recall how far I was pushed on that or asked about it, but they could well have asked, but I don't know.
Please could we turn to FUJ 20118186. This is the third supplemental agreement between Pathway and Post Office Counters dated 19th January 2000, so just over a week after that board meeting. Yeah. And so presumably this was being discussed around that time of that board meeting we were discussing.
Yes, it must have been.
Can we go to page 2, please? And to D. Thank you. It says, by clause 6.1.1 of the second supplemental agreement, POCL has a right to postpone the resumption of rollout from January 2000 if any of the criteria in parts A to C of Schedule 4 to the second supplemental agreement shall not have been met by 24th November 1999. And then E, both POCL and the contractor acknowledge that at least one of those criteria were not met, and accordingly that the right contained in clause 6.1.1 became exercisable. And then please could we turn to page 5, paragraph 5.3. We're back to this in the data integrity issue, and it says that the contractor shall, from the date of this agreement until the end of the TIP integrity checking period, make available to POCL, promptly upon request, appropriate experts to explain to POCL the contractor's analysis of all root causes of cash account discrepancies and the measure which the contractor shall have implemented in order to prevent the recurrence of any cash account discrepancies which would not have been detected by the accounting integrity control release. So do you accept at this stage cash account discrepancies remained an ongoing problem?
I think that is evidence that they were.
And by this clause, it was envisaged that the reconciliation processes that were supposed to identify cash account discrepancies may fail to do so.
I could read that into those words. They're quite technical words. And the end bit, which says, which would not have been detected by accounting integrity control, does imply that, yes.
Would you have raised these concerns with the Post Office Board at the time?
Not at this level of detail, I wouldn't have thought. Apart from the generalities which were noted by the board, that the errors were still being worked on and improvements sought. So in general terms, I think what the board minutes record is us saying there are still issues that we're managing. This is a level of detail that we would not have, in those words, taken to the board.
Well, let's move to the March board meeting. That's POL 30021469. The 14th of March 2000 board minutes, again, at which you were attended. Please could you turn to page 7 of this. And if we could move down, sorry. Thank you. This describes, it's described as commercial development of the Horizon platform in Post Office network. It refers to firstly the rollout, and then it moves on to discuss the other commercial uses of the Horizon platform.
Yeah.
At this stage, this is following the third supplemental agreement. Did you discuss with the board in any detail the ongoing issues with data integrity?
I don't know, but looking at the record here, the focus was on the future, not the current, because the rollout had been accelerating, and we'd learned all the lessons of the early offices and had put those in place, and the rollout was now going at a rate that we had originally planned. And so the board would have taken comfort from that. But I can't see any evidence that we brought to them anything else.
And do you recall whether either John Roberts or anyone on the board asked you any questions about that issue at the time?
No, I don't. No.
Thank you, sir. That concludes my questions, but we have some questions from recognised legal representatives.
All right. Well, my understanding from last night was that Mr. Henry and either Mr. Steen or Mr. Jacob had comparatively few questions. Is that still the position?
My understanding...
If so, they can go first, and then Jules can mop up, so to speak.
My understanding is no questions from Howe & Co. Is...
All right, fine.
That's correct, yes.
Sir, no questions on behalf of Hodge, Jones and Allen either.
Right. All right, then straight over to, is it Ms. Patrick or Mr. Maloney's going to ask the questions?
Sir, it's me, Miss Patrick.
Fine.
Good morning, Mr. Sweetman. Can you hear me?
Good morning, Patrick.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
And can you see me?
I can.
Thank you. We only have a very few questions, and it's on two topics. The first question we have is about one document, and it's at Paul 3031230. Is that now on the screen for you?
Yes, it is.
And this was an internal review within POCL, commissioned from the POCL Finance Director in January 1999. And at that time, you were the head of the POCL management team, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
It's not marked as to who received the document, but as the MD, would it have been provided to you?
Yes, it would have been.
Thank you. If we can go to page 2, and we're looking at 2.4, please, which is the second paragraph from the top. And we can read there. I'll read it out so that we've all got the same understanding. The conclusion of negotiations with a firm decision to proceed should put an end to a protracted period of uncertainty, permitting a fresh start with renewed focus not only for the Horizon project, but for the POCL business. And it's this next part I want to look at particularly. Unfortunately, many uncertainties, unanswered questions and doubts about the future remain, so that the benefits of such a fresh start seem unlikely to be obtained without a concerted, focused and single-minded leadership effort by both POCL and ICL teams to emphasise the positive. And if we can skip down a little to paragraph 2.6, I think you can see that there on the screen, Mr. Sweetman. Can you see paragraph 2.6? And that starts, several senior managers close to the project, but not principal negotiators, whose judgment I respect, express significant reservations about the risks of proceeding. These centre on their continuing doubt about the ability of ICL to deliver a satisfactory product, the absence of transparency in the PFI contract, the risk that ICL's financial fragility will endure throughout the project, with the possibility of repeated claims on the Post Office for extra contributions, which by then having no alternative, it will be unable to resist, and doubts about POCL's own ability to give it the focus essential for success. Observation of the track record so far offers reasonable foundation for such views. And if we could skip over to page 6 of this document, we also want to look at page 2, para 2.24, which is a little bit further down on that document as you can see it now. This is the summary of his findings. In summary, there are drawbacks and uncertainties with going ahead, but they are not greater than those associated with termination. Going ahead will require very heavy, single-minded commitment to Horizon and to the partnership with ICL in order to minimise the drawbacks. And if we skip to the very next paragraph, 3.1, which I think you can see, it goes on with his recommendations. The high profile of the Horizon renegotiation and the Post Office's support of Horizon against significant opposition mean that failure to make the deal stick with a successful implementation would be politically and commercially extremely damaging. And this part is in bold. It is of great importance for the credibility of the Post Office, brackets, not just POCL, close brackets, that it should be seen to have judged the debate correctly and made the right decision. And if we skip further down to 3.2, which goes over the page, his recommendations continue. Furthermore, POCL's commercial success will now depend heavily on Horizon. It will not have the funds for alternatives. Horizon must, therefore, be implemented in a way which ensures achievement of service and commercial goals for customers and clients. To be sure of this, the approach to developing the business vision will need to be adapted to become visibly Horizon-centric. People's enthusiasm for finding workarounds and alternative approaches will need to be firmly channeled into making Horizon deliver what is required. It is likely that this Horizon centricity will need to apply beyond the bounds of current POCL business. Shaping for competitive success will need to ensure that organisational boundaries facilitate effective operation of Horizon and the ICL partnership and not make it gratuitously more difficult. Now that we've read that and we've all got the same understanding, yesterday I think you said POCL had to be sustainable in the post-ACT world. And I think you agree that to do that, first, Horizon had to work. Is that right?
Correct.
And I think you said yesterday, Ian McCartney may have told you, or something like, I'm going to make sure everyone knows in the Post Office that this has got to work. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
So POCL would have had external pressure to adapt to become visibly Horizon-centric. Is that fair?
But we wanted, yes, we wanted to be Horizon-centric. That was our strategy.
And what I'm suggesting is you wanted that, but there was also external pressure to achieve that approach.
It's an iterative process. we wanted Horizon because of what it would equip the company to do in the marketplace. And we went out and sold the idea to the politicians and the senior management and the board that if we had this computerized network, modern network, we could do these things. We could actually sustain our commercial future. So we were broadcasting, that's what we want, and that bounced back to us saying, yes, okay, you get on with it, but make sure you deliver on the targets. And that's the management process. So I don't think they were over the top pressures. I think that people were playing their roles. Politicians were making big decisions, and they had very difficult decisions to make. The board were taking those on board. The chairman and chief executive had that obligation to deliver to the political needs, the shareholders' needs. That got disseminated down into the businesses, and we all responded. This particular report, I think, was by Roger Tabor, who was the then finance director of Post Office Network or Post Office Limited. And he was a very professional, analytical individual. And I think he would have been asked to produce this report to make sure, as a team, we had everything. Do we have all this in place? Do we have our own confidence that we have this in place to deliver? And this is an internal document which says, are we fit for purpose? And he was telling us all these things need to be in place if you're going to deliver what the business plans are.
So, Mr. Sweetman, thank you. So, was becoming visibly horizon-centric the message which you and your staff and your board, your team, adopted from then on?
Well, it wasn't from then on. Running up to it, I think Roger in this report was saying, you've got to continue it. Don't back off from this core strategy that you're following of equipping the network of postmasters with a modern computer system. Okay. You can't back off of it because there isn't a plan B.
Thank you. And so I'm going to move on to the second topic that we wanted to ask about.
Yeah.
You said yesterday in detailed discussion the board would have expressed concerns over outstanding technical issues. I want to look at two later board meeting minutes. And the first is a meeting minute from May 2001, which is RMG 7009. RMG 7009. And we've got it on the screen. And I think what I would like to do is see on the first page, we can see that you were present. And if we can scroll down to page 5, the part that I want to deal with is on page 5. And that was the 1st of May, 2001. And can you see that document, Mr. Sweetman?
Yes, I can.
And we see at the top there's a heading, Error Reconciliation and Accounting, and I think a paper number, and Horizon Beyond 2005, and again a paper number. And I'm going to read underneath so that we're all looking at the same document. The board considered 2 papers from Stuart Sweetman and the accompanying presentation by David Smith, which gave an illustration of the fundamental nature of the change to the operating process that would be delivered by the Error Reconciliation and Accounting Project, ERA. ERA needed to be viewed in conjunction with options for the future of Horizon Beyond 2005, which included, inter alia, an approach to securing external funding for ERA. And it goes on to say things that the board noted in relation to that project or that plan. And if we could scroll down to D, I think you can see that, Mr. Sweetman.
Yes, I can.
Success of the ERA project would depend on client cooperation in redesigning their own forms and procedures, most current clients were keen to be involved, especially now that they were able to see Horizon as a working reality. And if we could scroll down to E, and I think we're going to have to go further. So if we could bring E up to the top of the page, that would be helpful. And it goes on. The success of the Horizon installation programme had helped increase confidence in ICL as a supplier. However, they were not necessarily the best future supplier, but the recommendation was to continue with them, as the potential disruption to the PO network from starting a new procurement process to source a new supplier now would be considerable and require a rewriting of the strategic plan. However, it was recognised from a negotiating point of view, it was highly risky to give ICL a commitment for the future, and thought more thought should be given to our negotiating stance. It goes on a little to say some more about it should not be automatically assumed automatically that ICL's funding of the investment was the only option, and it goes on that it may be preferable to seek external funding. And if we could go over the page, please. It goes on to talk about what the executive board agreed, and it says, while inevitably there were a large number of unresolved issues about ERA and Horizon, the general direction was right, and the respective strategies should be worked up further in the light of this discussion, and would be taken to the July Consignia Board as a strategic issue. That last point, what did you understand to be the large number of unresolved issues about ERA and Horizon?
I don't recall a lot of detail, to be honest. What I've read there, in my earlier evidence, I said that there was a group of people in Chesterfield whose job it was to pick up errors and then chase them down until they've been corrected, either in the centre or in the cash accounting system of sub-postmasters. And that was a very big and expensive operation, because it was there, and in a perfect world where systems are working absolutely perfectly, it's a wasted cost, a big lump of a big group of people correcting errors. If errors aren't created, you don't need those people. And I think ERA was about smartening up that whole process of picking up and correcting errors. That would need to take input from Horizon, but would be a sort of central accounting reconciliation system. I'm sort of thinking through what this would have been. And clearly, how you link that central reconciliation process to the detail of Horizon in local offices would take some designing and some development. And that is what I think this refers to. But I can't absolutely remember. This is me putting words behind
Mr.
the words
Sweetman,
I
I
can
might
see.
be able to assist you. In the interest of speed, there was a part of that minute that I did not read, and I'm sure you can see it at the top of the page there. ERA would cause at least 400 job reductions in Chesterfield, and a plan for managing these and the associated negative PR would be needed. Now, what you've said about the error corrections happening at Chesterfield and that team being there, does that note there help your memory?
So I hadn't remembered it was of the order of 400, but certainly to keep on top of the error rates and correcting them to make sure we were keeping proper books of account, we had invested heavily in this correction process. Now, if we could develop a system which did that electronically, computer to computer, we would then, coldly be able to save the cost of 400 jobs. Now, I think there were 2,000 or 3,000 people employed in Chesterfield. We were the major employer, in Chesterfield, and we would have to handle that not only negative PR, but from an industrial relations point of view, that would all be very sensitive issues to manage.
Thank you, Mr. Sweetman. So this may be a project from your recall that would be looking at adjusting how errors are handled once they're being managed.
Yes.
Looking at the record, there's no record here of the board asking for any further information or any update on what the management of reconciliation or balancing errors which were happening in Horizon looked like, is there?
There isn't.
And it says, of course, we've gone to that note, inevitably, there were a large number of unresolved issues about ERA and Horizon, but there's no note here or record of the board asking for any further information on what those inevitable and seemingly unresolved issues were or were likely to be, is there?
No, there isn't.
In hindsight, was the board here being invited to approve a commercial project with insufficient information about underlying issues which might relate to their decision?
No, they weren't authorising it, no.
Okay.
If you page back up, it'll give the context which all this was being discussed, I think.
I think if we go back to the page we were on, I may be able to assist Mr. Sweetman. If we go back to point E and down and over the page, we see that the board was saying their general direction was right and the respective strategies should be worked up further.
Yes, I think what... to understand the management process within the post office, I was bringing this to my colleagues on the executive board as, in our plan, we're thinking of well, we need to spend this sort of money on doing this sort of thing. Can we have support for that direction?
And what the
this
board...
is what this discussion was about. You know, is it the right direction to go? But they were not all. They were saying, yes, go away and work up the detail and come back with a project to be authorised. And then that would have been authorised by the major projects committee, and if it was big enough, by the board. This was a nod through. This is the right way to go. Go ahead and develop a project.
A nod through, but at no point or no record there of them asking about an update on reconciliation or balancing errors, or for any further information on what the inevitable and unresolved issues were likely to be at that point.
No, there is no record there, and it doesn't surprise me that there was no record, because that was not the purpose of the discussion. It might well have come out of discussion, but it was not the purpose of this discussion.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the last document that we want to look at, Mr. Sweetman.
Okay.
And it's Paul 3021476. And I think we can see you on the first page there, and you're in attendance. The date is the 12th of June 2001, so the following month. And we can see that you are now, by this point, Group Managing Director, Customer and Banking Services.
Correct.
Is that a change in role for you?
Yeah, we went through a reorganisation, and in that role, I had the Managing Director of the Post Office Network reporting to me, so that individual would have looked after effectively the operations of the old Post Office Counters network. But I also had strategic directors developing the banking services and also customer services down in Swindon, which ran the BBC licensing system.
And so if we can look over to page 4. and there's only one point that's relevant to the inquiry on that page. You'll see a third of the way down. This is in the Chief Executive's report, which makes it's made clear on the page before. It reads, Horizon. The board also expressed its congratulations and thanks to the team working on the Horizon programme on the successful completion of the installation of over 40,000 machines and training over 60,000 people in the post office network.
Yes.
And the thanks are minuted. There's no recollection, or do you have any recollection of any update then on any impact across the network of the installation, or any record of any request or any update as to the impact of any training as part of that process?
No, I don't recall that sort of discussion.
Again, there's no record there or any update on whether there were at that time any recorded problems arising for sub-postman?
No, there isn't.
And there's no record of any discussion here, is there? It's only a note of congratulations.
Correct.
Would it be consistent with your recall that after the resumption of the rollout in January 2000, the board and the board meetings focused only on the commercial opportunities for Horizon and the successes of Horizon?
I think that's whether it was only, I don't recall, but principally the focus was on the future and developing profitable services to operate through our network.
Thank you, Mr. Sweetman. We have no further questions for you.
Thank you.
So, Richard Whittam, we indicated yesterday we had one very short point for clarification.
Fine.
Mr. Sweetman, my name's Richard Whittam. We represent Fujitsu. And just want to take you back, please, to late August, early September of 1999. And it was the Ernst & Young letter we looked at yesterday. I'll just ask that to come up. POL 3090839. And on that page, you told us yesterday, Jeff Triggs was the very clever lawyer at Slaughter and May.
Yes.
Can you recall now what role Keith Baines had at that time in Post Office Counters Limited?
Well, it says there Horizon Commercial. I wouldn't like to produce a job description now. I really don't remember. But he was an individual who was good at handling detail and would have ensured that what we agreed with Pathway was reflected in agreements, were properly priced and that sort of thing. But I really have not a very clear view of that.
Don't worry, I appreciate I'm asking you about a single document 23 years ago.
Sorry.
But if we could just go to the next page, please, just so you can recall its context. The very first paragraph, it's obviously a letter that had been requested by Post Office Counters Limited.
Yes, that's right.
And you'll recall that David Miller had suggested you might have been the person who'd requested it, and you said you weren't surprised. It could have been you. You couldn't recall at this remove of time. But you did remember.
I don't recall specifically requesting it, but it was the sort of thing I might have suggested to him would have been useful in our discussions with Pathway.
And you described the discussions at this time as the very hard-nosed discussions with Pathway, and this will be useful to give you a bit of clout.
I think that's fair, yes, and I think that's totally reasonable.
And so this letter, could it be summarised, was requested as a tool to be used by Post Office Counters Limited in its negotiations with ICL?
Not solely as a tool, because we wanted to keep the auditors on side. They needed to be able to design their audit processes, etc. And it was important for them to understand the details of the system. And as a way of bringing them in as well. I'd say giving us a bit of clout was one of the objectives, but not necessarily the sole objective, because we wanted to know their professional view, because that gave assurance to what we were trying to do on our internal agenda.
Mr. Sweetman, thank you very much. Sir, that's all that I ask.
Thank you. I think that now concludes your evidence, Mr. Sweetman. So I'd like to thank you for making your written statement and for devoting the time to give oral evidence to us.
Would I be permitted to read a final statement that I've written into the record?
Yes, I'd forgotten you mentioned that yesterday, but please do.
Okay, thank you. I have learned from the media and my involvement in this inquiry of the devastating impact that flawed prosecutions have had on the lives of sub-postmasters and their families. They all have my sincere sympathy. These are easy words for me to say, but I really do mean them. I'm sure that this inquiry will identify numerous contributing factors of commission and omission that led to what happened. My detailed memory of events of 20 to 25 years ago is poor, but it has been stimulated by the documents you have questioned me about. I hope it has been shown that throughout my involvement with Horizon, I was at all times acting to ensure the long-term viability and sustainability of post office counters and its network of post offices. If Horizon had failed, then many thousands of postmasters and Crown Office staff would have lost their livelihoods, and communities throughout the country would have been deprived of access to important services that the network provided. I believe I led post office counters by balancing the needs of our stakeholders, our public customers, our paying clients, our employees, our sub-postmasters, and our shareholder. I was personally driven by the concept of continuous improvement within a quality management framework we call Customer First. My personal integrity has its origins in training and practicing as a chartered accountant. I believe that I adhered to those principles throughout the events being investigated. I believe I had well-founded confidence in the people and teams that reported and supported me in my role. When I used to go into my local post office, it was with a sense of pride to see the Horizon terminals being used. That pride has now been tarnished by the revelations that this inquiry is investigating. For the record, I don't believe I have had any personal involvement in the prosecution decisions that this inquiry is investigating. I am appalled at what has been revealed about them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweetman.
Thank you, sir. So if we may take a short break while we change witnesses here.
Yes, of course. 5 minutes enough, or do you want longer?
I think if we go to 10, sir, that would be
10,
appreciated.
fine. All right, 10-minute break then.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you, likewise. I call Jeremy Folkes, please.
Swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but
and
the
nothing
truth.
but the truth.
Okay.
Take a seat.
Please take a seat, Mr. Folkes.
Thank you.
As you know, my name is Jason Beer, and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Can you tell us your full name, please?
Jeremy Peter Folkes.
Thank you very much for giving evidence to the inquiry, and thank you very much for the very detailed statement that you previously provided to the inquiry. We're very grateful to you for the assistance that you have given and which you will give today. You should have in front of you a hard copy of your witness statement, which, excluding the index to the exhibits to it, is 70 pages in length and is dated the 7th of September 2022. Is that
Yes.
in front of you?
Yes.
Could you turn to page 70, please, the last page? Is that your signature?
It is.
Are the contents of the statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
There's one very minor correction on page 39.
I wonder whether we can go to that. That's WITN 05970100 at page 39.
It's paragraph 114.
So page 39.
It's just, it says there that Bird and Bird were POCL's legal firm. In rereading documentation, I realised they were the programmes, the PDA's legal firm, rather than being POCL's.
Thank you very much. With that correction, are the contents of the statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are.
Thank you very much. A copy of that statement will be uploaded to the inquiry's website. I'm not going to ask you questions about every aspect of it, just related parts of it. Do you understand? Your background and experience, please. I think you were employed by the Post Office between 1987 and early February 2000, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Working primarily in projects for Post Office Counters Limited.
Yes, I was working, actually employed by the Post Office IT department, but almost everything I did was for POCL projects.
So far as concerns this inquiry, your most relevant work, is this right, was on the Horizon project or Horizon programme, as it became known, from 1994 until early February 2000.
Yes.
In terms of your qualifications and career before Horizon, and indeed after it, I think you qualified with a degree in mathematics, is that right?
Yes.
On graduation, you worked for British Gas, then Logica, which I think was an IT and management consultancy firm.
To be pedantic, I actually worked for British Gas before going to university on a gap year and during my time at university. But I did work in IT during that time.
Okay, and then after graduation to Logica, is that right?
Yes.
And am I right, that was an IT and management consultancy firm?
It was, but my work was on IT projects.
And you worked on software projects, always holding a technical role, is that right?
Yes.
Whether as a developer, a designer, or a team leader?
Yes.
You joined, as I've said, the Post Office in 1987, left in 2000, and you went to work for a company that was later acquired by the Isha Group, is that right?
Yes.
You worked with the Isha Group for about 21 years, rising to Chief Technical Officer, CTO, until your retirement last year in 2021.
Yeah, in the last couple of years, I actually moved into a consultancy role and did actually work part-time during that. So I think my job title technically was Principal Consultant in the last couple of years.
Thank you. When you joined the Post Office in 1987, I think your employer was the Post Office, a statutory corporation, is that right?
Yes.
And you worked in the IT department of the Post Office, is that
Yes.
right? And did you have normal line management reporting structures within the IT department?
Yes.
You tell us in your statement, no need to turn it up, it's in paragraph 1, that in 1994, so that's about 7 years after you joined, you were, quote, effectively seconded to Post Office Counters Limited, is that right?
Yes.
What did that secondment mean in terms of your employment status?
For my formal status, none whatsoever. I was basically working on a POCL project, but I was still, from a pay and rations point of view, employed by Post Office IT.
Was your line manager in the IT department, or was it he or she within Post Office Counters Limited?
I had a line manager within Post Office IT, but I had very little contact with them, to be honest. I was effectively a fully sort of operating member of the POCL team.
But why were people brought from, this may seem an obvious question, why were people brought from the Post Office's IT department into the POCL Horizon programme?
The way Post Office was structured at that point is the individual businesses didn't have IT functions. There was a central IT function, so there were many projects done for the various business units by Post Office IT. Because this was a project, obviously, with a major IT part of it, they did look to bring in people from Post Office IT.
Did, without that bringing in, POCL have the relevant IT experience?
No, I don't think they would have done.
what, if any, technical expertise was there at POCL management level?
There was a post office counters, I think it was called an IS strategy unit, so information systems rather than IT, looking at the overall strategy. I can't honestly remember what other functions there were. There may have been functions related to individual projects that were up and running as far as day-to-day management of those functions within POCL, but work on new projects would have always been put out to Post Office IT.
Would you know whether at this time, 1994 to 2000, there was any technical expertise at the POCL board level?
I wouldn't know.
Can I turn to the stages of the Horizon programme in which you were involved? So you joined, I think, after the procurement process had been launched in August 1994. The initial very large list of service providers had been cut down to 5.
Yes.
And at that stage, the 5 were BT, Cardlink, EDS, IBM and Pathway.
Yes.
At the time that you joined, the statement of service requirements had already been issued to the 5 suppliers that I've just mentioned.
Yes, please.
That was back on the 13th of April 1995, so pre your joining. No, that's post your joining, isn't it?
I can't remember exactly what date I joined the programme, but...
Okay. Can I break down your role over the succeeding 6 years or so into 5 parts? These are my descriptions of it. Please agree or disagree with them, but it's just to give some structure to your evidence. It's not how matters are arranged in your witness statement. Would it be right that your first role was the evaluation of the 5 responses of the 5 bidders that I've just mentioned, and that resulting in the list being cut to 3, with BT and EDS being eliminated?
Correct.
Your second role was within the so-called demonstrator stage, is that right?
Yes.
Just to explain to us, because it's an odd word, demonstrator stage, what the demonstrator stage was.
It was a slightly odd phrase for us as well, I think. The intention of the demonstrator was to give the post office team a chance to look at the 3 potential service providers, to understand what they're proposing in more detail than was within their documentation, so to be able to help them through the process of refining their offerings to us, and also to give them the ability to come back to us and ask further questions for clarification.
Thank you.
And demonstrate, I think they were trying to demonstrate their capability and their solution to us. I think that's where the name came from.
Got it. The demonstrator phase, is this right, was broken down into streams or strands.
Yes.
And you were the team leader for one of those strands called POCL Infrastructure.
Yes.
And we'll come back in more detail to what that involved in a moment. Your third role was within the evaluation stage, and would this be right, in broad terms, it involved scoring the bids against some predefined criteria, and you again had responsibility for part of that process?
Yes.
The fourth role was in the development and assurance stage of the system, and that's after the contract had been awarded to ICL Pathway in April and May 1996. And then your fifth role was within the live trials that happened thereafter of various iterations as part of the acceptance process.
Yes.
So can I turn to the first role, and I'm going to deal with this very shortly, the evaluation of the 5 selected bidders and the narrowing down of that to 3. You deal with this very briefly in your witness statement, no criticism there. Is it right that nothing critical emerged at that stage of the process, so far as concerns ICL Pathway and so far as concerns this inquiry?
Correct. That was an initial, if you like, sift to reduce down to 3, and then we were going to be taking those 3 forward. So I believe the intention was at that stage that that everybody who went through in those 3 should be credible, that would passed initial hurdles. So they passed those hurdles, I believe, to get to that stage.
Thank you. Could I turn straight then to the demonstrator phase or stage and your second role? And as we've said, you were the team leader in the demonstrator stage with responsibility for the POCL infrastructure strand. Can we look, please, at WITN 0597101? That'll come up on the screen, Mr. Folkes. It's a single-page document which you exhibit to your witness statement, and it sets out, as the heading suggests, the objectives of the demonstrator stream, as it's called here. First, to clarify the requirements with the 3 suppliers and ensure they have a valid understanding of the requirements. Second, to identify deficiencies in the requirements and to feed these back to the BA POCL requirements team for resolution. Under solutions, to explore and understand the supplier's solutions and identify issues and risks associated with their solutions. To input to the service provider risk register. To provide a process to allow suppliers to reduce their risks. And then assessment, to assess the supplier's solutions as input to the overall evaluation process and to provide confidence to the stakeholders in the supplier's solutions. Do you agree that this accurately sets out the objectives of the demonstrator stage?
Yes, sir.
And so, is this right? It was intended to be mutually beneficial. In particular, it was also intended to be beneficial to the supplier, the service supplier, who may ultimately go on and win the bid.
Very much so. And from the point of view of being able them to get more information, but also to be able to raise concerns with us if the requirements didn't make sense or were unmeetable in some way.
So it's not just beneficial to you as the clients, it was intended to improve the quality of the service and the system being proposed by the supplier. Yes. In the event that they won the bid.
Yes.
And this all took place, is this right, in the second half of 1995?
Yes, primarily I think October, November, December 1995.
Thank you. Can we see what you learned about ICL pathway in this part of the procurement exercise and look at WITN 0597 0102? Excuse me. This is a summary of activities as part of the demonstrator stage and is a report we can see written by you. Is that right?
That is, yes.
And who would the report have been sent to? Who was it sent to?
I believe it was input into the overall procurement team. There was a specific team running the procurement, and it would have gone, I presume, from there into the evaluation board. There are various levels within that team. I unfortunately can't tell you exactly which individuals received it, but the purpose of this was to basically summarise what we've been doing over 3 to 4 months and to feedback the key issues from it.
Thank you. And so it would have been seen both within Post Office Counters Limited and within ICL Pathway?
It wouldn't have gone to ICL Pathway because this document contains information on all 3 bidders. It would have been seen within the PDA, the Programme Delivery Authority, or it's the team as then existed to do the evaluation, to do the procurement.
So both the Post Office and the Benefits Agency sides of the house?
They should have done, yes.
Thank you. Can we go over the page, please? And just look at the introduction. And the second paragraph reads, the paper first outlines the structure and organisation of the strand, the general philosophy followed during the life of the Strand. This is followed by an appendix per service provider in which their general style is described, together with a list of meetings attended. And then background under paragraph 2 explains when the demonstrator Strand was conceived. October 1995, ran as one of 6 strands until closure in January 1996. Skipping a paragraph, the original plan did not contain an infrastructure strand per se. It would have been partly covered by design assurance, partly by other strands. And you say in the last line there, the infrastructure strand enjoyed the dubious advantage of starting in October from a clean sheet. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think when the plan was first put together, there was no concept that we needed to look at the infrastructure. The programme was based around the idea of a number of different services, and some of those services were applications such as BES or EPOS or APS within the post office side. But obviously all those needed to run on a platform. And what we were trying to procure was an overall platform for the post office to go forward with. And the discussions that we had in the programme was that you needed to look at that platform as a whole.
Got it.
It was no good looking at... we weren't going and buying an automated payment service and separately a BES service and separately an EPOS service. They were going to be running on the same hardware provided by the service provider, the same underlying platform services, the same comms network, the same central services. So it was to look at that, the techie side, if you like, rather than the application side.
I understand. Can we go forward to page 5, please? And look under approach in paragraph 5 and 5.1 demonstrator meetings to see what happened. You say the demonstrator process was based around a series of full-day meetings with each service provider, with each strand being allocated a specific day of each week for each supplier. As part of the planning at the introductory meetings, they were generally held at the service provider's main office. Some were located at specific subcontractor sites if this facilitated specific demonstrations. In addition, a 2-week period in December 1995 was reserved for site visits, this being used for a combination of reference site visits and presentations and discussions with overseas subcontractors. And then you set out the format of each meeting. So is that the approach taken?
It was, yes.
Thank you. Can we go forward to page 15, please, to see what you say about ICL pathway? I should say that in between page 5 and page 15, there is information about the other bidders. I'm concentrating on pathway. This is divided into 2 parts, what you say about it. If we just look at the headings first, C1 is technical infrastructure area, and then over the page, please, at the foot of the page, over the page, please. Support services area, yes?
Yes.
So if we go back to the first page, please. Thank you. Technical infrastructure area. What does technical infrastructure area mean?
So this basically meant everything around the technical platform that Pathway would be providing for the application services to run on. So this would include everything from the hardware in the office, the communications networks, to the centre, what systems will be provided at the centre, and all, if you like, the common elements that were not part of the individual applications.
I understand. And you say this, meetings with Pathway took place in the meeting rooms at their offices in Feltham. Unlike the other 2 suppliers, the meetings were fronted by sales-oriented rather than technically oriented staff. Initially Liam Foley, then Martin Johnston, and these representatives also took the notes, actions from the meeting. Numbers at the meetings varied. You set out some core members of the team, with others being brought in. In the 3rd paragraph, you say the meetings were characterised by less structure and less evidence of preparation than with the other 2 suppliers. Some presentations were given, however, these were fairly informal, with very few prepared slides, with diagrams drawn on a flip chart when required. Papers were initially hard to extract from Pathway, and although this problem did ease up to a certain extent during the demonstrator, a significant amount of chasing was required to clear the outstanding documentation at the end of the phase. Papers themselves varied in quality and detail, with less evidence of internal review prior to issue. And then scroll down, please. Towards the end of the demonstrator phase, Pathway started taking a fairly robust attitude on risks, with the appearance of their risk director, Martin Bennett, at the start and finish of each meeting to check on the status of risks and actions. Although Martin took a fairly aggressive attitude towards the demonstrator team, his prime raison d'etre seemed to be ensure that the Pathway staff produced suitable responses. Despite this additional focus, adequate risk responses were still difficult to obtain, and a number of risks required repeated iterations of responses before clearance could be recommended. In cross-stream meetings, Pathway took a more sales-orientated approach with less solution content than with the other suppliers. This was evidenced by the demonstration of the somewhat irrelevant household budgeting scheme and demonstrating putting demo team photos on cards rather than showing a prototype of their solution to genuine requirements. So you're identifying maybe 5 or 6 problems with the way in which they were demonstrating to you.
Yes. What we wanted these meetings to be was a genuine substantive interaction back and forth between the service provider and our team. We felt that that worked with the other 2 service providers as far as we could expect for, I think it was 6 meetings over a number of weeks. What we found here with Pathway is it was seen very much as a sort of a sales event. It was run by a sales team rather than the technical team, and it was they hadn't prepared as much in the way as technical documentation for it or diagrams or whatever. That last comment in there was it felt very salesy. They were showing that you could give customers cards with photos on, so they bought in a card printer and took our photos and put the photo on a plastic card. That might work from a sales point of view. From my point of view, that was no good whatsoever. I know you can put photos on cards. I wanted to understand their technical solution. So they seem to be operating at a slightly different level, and they almost saw these as like a sales event that kind of had to be done rather than an opportunity to actually work with us. And going back to what you said earlier, the intent here was it was going to be of mutual benefit to help us understand them, but also to allow them to improve their solutions.
To what extent did what we read here about Pathway's approach reflect the remaining time that you spent working with Pathway over the succeeding few years?
I guess it would be simple to say it does reflect it. I think it probably reflects it for slightly different reasons, in that when we moved forward into the contract, it was the PFI nature that I think caused a total difference in opinion. In this case, I'm not quite sure why they took this approach. From our point of view, it was equally as annoying because we generally wanted to help all 3 service providers come up with the best offerings to the Post Office and BA so that we could then pick the best one from them.
So it would be dangerous to say that what we read here, demonstrated behaviours or an attitude of mind by the company that we then see played out over the succeeding years in its dealings with you.
In hindsight, I can see similarities, but I'd say I think they're probably for different reasons.
In the paragraph starting towards the end of, you say Pathway started taking a fairly robust attitude on risks. What does that mean, please? Okay,
so one of the outputs from the demonstrator phase, or one of the tools we had, is we could raise risks against each service provider. Just to be clear, risk was basically we're raising a potential issue and giving them the chance then to address it. So the fact that a risk was raised, if it was then addressed, wouldn't count against them. But it gave us a formal mechanism to say, look, you've talked about this, either we don't believe it, or we don't think it's going to work, or it doesn't meet a requirement, whatever. We're going to raise a risk against it. That put it down on paper as a risk. Those were then shared with them, and they were then given the opportunity to address those risks. And the idea was they could then come back with a risk response, which we could then evaluate, and that might say, yep, that risk is fine, it has been cleared, or it would be a risk, if it wasn't cleared, that would then go forward into the evaluation and actually then taken forward with the pathway risks into the real project. So what Martin Bennett was, I think they sussed at this point, is that they didn't take us seriously on risks. They were going to count against them, because it wasn't just the individuals' strands who were being, they were meeting with. If I raise a risk, that risk went into the service provider.
Excuse me.
That risk went into the SPRR, the Service Provider Risk Register, and would then have full visibility and would count against them. So I guess at this point of view, Martin was doing his job, which was to minimise the number of risks. At some points, it appeared to us that he was not keen on us raising risks, but he was also in that line here, I say he's raising that, seemed to be to ensure that the pathway staff produce suitable responses. He wanted them to go and clear the responses, because he was going to be marked down if he ended up with 20 risks at the end of it.
I understand. Can we go over the page, please? I look at the bottom half of the page. Support services area. Can you explain what support services area is, please? Okay,
so when we set up the POCL infrastructure stream, there was a second, well, there was a piece of work that didn't really have a home, and that was the support services, such as help desks, such as field engineering, I think such as installation, that didn't really have a home until we invented POCL infrastructure, and then it was added to my remit within POCL infrastructure. Because support services, help desk, etc., wasn't my speciality, I actually got in a experienced person from POCL who sort of led on this, a guy called Steve Grayston, who led on the support services side. So that was very much looking at help desks.
Okay, I think that's an adequate description. Thank you. You say that Stephen Muchow was the Pathway Consortium representative who dealt with the POCL support service aspects. I think we're going to hear from him in a later phase. And you say the impression was given that the methodology... Who was that impression given by?
Given by Stephen Muchow, I think.
The impression was given that the methodology by which the procurement was being conducted was unnecessary and time-consuming, stroke costly. Meetings were conducted in a more ad hoc manner. Papers and reference documents were not easy to obtain, and when received, were less comprehensive than anticipated. Discussions, although fruitful, were less flowing than expected. A site visit was made at the ICL facility in Havant. This was well conducted with appropriate consortium personnel available for questions and information. Now, in the course of this stage of the process, you, as you've said, held a series of meetings with ICL Pathway, especially in November 1995. And I think notes were taken of the meeting, which were turned into meeting reports. Is that right?
Yes.
And I just want to establish the dates and the structure of them first, please. Can we look, please, at WITN 0597 0106? This is a meeting report for the 1st of November 1995. And we can see the attendees from the Benefits Agency and POCL, there's you and Mr. Grayston, who you just mentioned, and then from the supplier side, from ICL side on the right-hand side.
Yes.
And did you write these?
I wrote these, yes.
And if we just go through them to put them in evidence, can we go to 0597107, please? WITN 059700107. This is a report for the 8th of November. We've just looked at the 1st of November. This is the 8th of November. And then same reference, but 0108. Same reference, but sorry, that's for the 15th of November 1995. Same reference, but 0141. That's for the 22nd of November. Same reference, 0109. 29th of November 1995. Same reference, 0142. That's for a meeting on the 11th and the 12th of December 1995, I think in Boston, is that right?
Yes.
And then lastly, same reference, 0139. Uh, 11th of January 1996. So those are contemporaneous records that you took and turned into meeting reports of your contact with, at these meetings, ICL staff.
Yes. Just to say, we were having meetings with all three service providers on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Yes.
And generating copious notes. And I can't remember, was it that evening or on the Friday, we'd then spend the time turning these notes into a permanent record, and then taking forward the individual items within there, including in many cases either raising risks or closing down risks.
And that's why we see, for example, the dates were the 1st of November, then 7 days later on the 8th of November, and then 7 days later on the 15th of November, etc. Can I look at some of the things that were said in the course of 3 of those meeting reports? And can we go back to same reference 0106, please? And this is the meeting note for the 1st of November 1995. And can we look, please, at the second page at paragraph 13? Thank you. Counter hardware, Pathway believe, quote, no problem freezing tech base during the rollout if 12-month-ish. Lengthy discussion, especially around POCL wanting to test equipment. Pathway expecting very hands-off approach and practicalities of expecting that stability, all down to Pathway's agreement with subcontractors, exclamation mark, within parentheses. Can you tell us what that means, please, that paragraph? Decode it for us.
Okay. The rollout was going to be would have taken 12 to 18 months to roll out to 20,000 offices and 40,000 or so terminals. One of the questions that we probed was how they were going to actually manage doing that rollout, as in, do they buy 40,000 bits of kit and put them in a warehouse and then roll them out, or are they going to be taking them on month by month? Computers changed, technology changes, in particular firmware versions in PCs change. So it's quite possible that at the start of 18 months, the end of 18 months, the hardware may have changed, and that would affect things like testing and field support, etc. We weren't trying to manage it. We wanted to just understand of how they would manage it.
What does the sentence, Pathway expecting very hands-off approach, intend to convey?
They were expecting BA POCL to be hands-off.
What do you mean by hands-off? What do they mean by hands-off?
So they were not expecting us to have any particular interest in this or any involvement in this. So their view would be, I think that it's their job to manage the hardware. You know, what are you worrying about?
Thank you. Can we turn to same reference 0107, please? These are the meeting notes, or the report of the meeting for the 8th of November 1995. Can we turn to page 5, please? And look at the 4th and 5th bullet points, starting lack of cohesion. And you write, lack of cohesion between the people at the meeting must be doubt over ability to manage project if this interface to their customer is so weak. General problem that there is no documentation about the system, and the late arrival of Mike Murphy and his contradiction stroke clarification re earlier explanations call into severe doubt the knowledge of the consortia about what they are proposing and then how they may develop it stroke support it in any timescale. Can you explain what you meant by those 2 bullet points, please?
Yes, so, excuse me. So this meeting, we were looking at the Riposte software that Pathway were proposing. The Riposte software, which is already in use in Anpost, the Irish Post Office. Mike Murphy was the CEO and I think part owner of Escher, the provider of Riposte at the time, and Mike came to this meeting. The observation generally through this note is there seemed to be a lack of join-up between the Pathway people and what Mike Murphy was saying. And, you know, the concern here was that we were there as the customer. We were expecting Pathway to provide a single voice. We were more than happy to have an expert or experts from Escher there. That's what we wanted. But what we found is a lack of join-up as to what it was that Pathway were providing. And the whole purpose of the demonstrator phase was to try and get clarity as to what they were providing.
You make a bigger point. Must be doubt over ability to manage project if this interface to their customer is so weak. You're pointing towards the entirety of the project there, is that right?
I think what I meant in that point was, given the lack of cohesion between this team in what was probably one of the more important meetings they would have had, you know, when I wrote these notes up, I was wondering, well, how would this work in reality on the whole project? Now, yeah, I went on to say that there seemed to be contradictions and the comment there that there seemed to be a doubt about the knowledge of the consortia, i.e. Pathway overall, on what it was that they were proposing.
Thank you. And then lastly, in this selection of minutes, can we go to same reference 0109, please? This is the meeting report for the 29th of November 1995. Can we go forward to page 5, please? And under the heading Riposte, in paragraph 5, look at the second bullet point. You say, went over the failure in the walkthrough case in tedious detail again with Pathway tripping over themselves and Martin Johnson trying badly to show that he understood something. Pathway seemed keener to rubbish the specific example we'd come up with rather than addressing the issue. Seemed to miss the point that Mike Murphy had acknowledged it and did have an answer, using strong identity, see earlier, but Pathway were unable to explain. Can you decode that for us? Explain what you're referring to there.
Okay, I can't remember what the specific case was, but we'd come up with, well, how would this work? The Riposte system, if I can just digress for a moment, involves software running on each one of the terminals in an office. And these terminals basically replicate data between each other and replicate data up to the data center. And that's the whole benefit of the system, the whole way the system operates. We, I think, had come up with questions about failure cases. You know, what would happen if this became disconnected or that became disconnected? And what we wanted to tease out is, one, you know, how did these failure cases happen? But also, what became clear is that the pathway people didn't necessarily understand it. In this case, Martin Johnson, who I think was a salesperson who was sort of, no disrespect meant to him, but you know, he was in these meetings to sort of manage the meeting rather than provide technical information, went off trying to explain how Riposte worked, which wasn't a great success from what I see here. When we started raising issues on failure conditions, they seemed to be keener on trying to rubbish the specific examples we put forward rather than trying to address it.
Okay, can we go to the page, please?
If I can just say there,
Sorry.
You know, in a population of 40,000 terminals, if it can go wrong, it will. You know, it's not like, I'm sure the IT guys with their systems here will probably tell you the same. With 100 terminals, in a big post office estate, failure of hardware and network codes was always going to happen. Therefore, we needed to ensure, especially with the distributed system, that there was adequate coverage of the failure cases and that the system would work. And what we had here was that the examples appeared not to be taken seriously rather than being addressed.
In that sentence, you said especially with a distributed system.
Yes.
What do you mean by a distributed system?
Okay, so there are, in the Riposte system, there's persistent storage on every terminal. And the great advantage of this, it gives the ability for the terminal to operate even if the communications to the centre is offline. With a number of the other solutions, including, I believe, Horizon Online, as the Post Office then moved to, and also from, I believe, Cardlink and IBM, they were reliant upon online solutions. And that would have meant if the communications to the centre went down for any reason, that there'd be cases where the counterclerk just wouldn't be able to serve. And the ability to serve, even in cases of failure, such as a network going down, was important to the Post Office. And that was one of the perceived advantages of the pathway solution, that it was distributed, and therefore as long as the terminal was up and running, they could still serve.
Thank you. Over the page, please. Could we look at the second bullet point from the bottom, please? You say, another extremely frustrating contradictory day. Pathway seem afraid to admit that they are changing Riposte. On the one hand, it is of concern as the changes reduce the value of the reference site's track record. On the other, it is good at showing that they recognise the product is not perfect and may need changing for the higher volume environment that they are proposing. However, the secretive and ill-informed attitude is damaging credibility and amplifying our own doubts over the viability of the product. We've looked at 3 examples of the things that you said in meeting reports on the 1st of November, the 8th of November and the 29th of November 1995. Was the kind of thing that you were saying here fed back into those who had power to make a decision over the award of this contract? And if so, how?
It was fed up in the that summary document, particularly it was fed up in the risks. So we had specific risks. The risks had very high visibility. Risks on, for instance, the scalability of Riposte, the relationship with Escher, the ability of Pathway to manage the relationship with Escher. And those risks, I think I meant go through a list of them in the witness statement, those risks were visible all the way up to the evaluation board.
I was about to say, to which people within POCL were these meeting reports sent or distributed?
These meeting reports that I had here, I think would have only been distributed within the demonstrator team. These are obviously very detailed contemporaneous material. The the risks that came out of these went up into the procurement team, to the service provider risk register, and they would have been visible at the level of the evaluation team management. And I can't remember the names of all of those, but there's a document which records the outcome of the evaluation that has a list of the personnel who were in the on the evaluation team.
Notwithstanding what was written here, we know that the 5 bidders were narrowed to 3. Did you express a view at that time about Pathway being amongst that group?
So these meetings here were when we were already at 3.
Thank you.
Yes.
Can we turn then to your third role, which was, I think, at the evaluation stage, and you say that there was a part of it codenamed Amazon. Is that right?
Yes.
And this was, Amazon was more specifically an evaluation of the 3 bidders' responses, paper responses, to the rather extensive invitation to tender document. Is that right?
Yes.
And would this be in February and March 1996?
I believe so, yes.
And did it involve the team of which you were a part working away from the office in particular for an intensive 2-week session?
Yes.
And looking at it in a high-level summary, were there 2 elements or parts to this? Firstly, a financial and risk transfer evaluation, and secondly, a business and technical evaluation.
Correct. And it was the second of those that I was involved in.
Now, I think the evaluation took place by reference to a combination of monetary and non-monetary factors. Is that right?
Yes, although the part that we were involved in was purely on the qualitative rather than the quantitative.
Can we look at those, please? At poll 303 1154. You can see that this is a document of which you're not the author, dated the 11th of March 1996. Suppliers' scores in respect of value factors. You're familiar with this document, I think?
Yes.
And can you explain in general terms what it is?
Okay, so the procurement team, and Derek Selwood was a member of that team, had come up with a scoring model. The model had a fairly complicated mapping of value factors, they were called, in a number of different categories. I believe there's a table in there that explains what those are. I can't remember them individually.
Can we go to page 7 of the document, please? And if we just look at the whole thing. Is that the table of the value factors that you were just speaking about?
Yes.
And then if we go to page 9, please. We can see the, and if we can display page 10 at the same time, please. Thank you. We can see the 2 teams, the contracts stream on the bottom of the left-hand page and the demonstrator stream on the right-hand page.
Yes.
Of which you were a member and the group leader for, again, Pockle Infrastructure, is that right?
Yes.
Can you just tell us what the, before those 2 streams are, the programme review panel was? The membership of which is set out at the top left-hand side of the page.
I think the programme review panel was, if you like, the senior team providing the evaluation. They had representatives from each one of the streams, so you've got on there one or two representatives from the demonstrator team, one or two representatives from the contracts team. You also had people on there who were not part of the demonstrator, for instance, Bob King, who was a post office counters manager, but he wasn't part of the programme as such.
Thank you.
The demonstrator team was doing detailed work that then fed into that, and I presume the contracts stream likewise.
Can we go forwards to page 11, please? This is Annex C of the document. If we could just look at the whole page to start with, please. I think this breaks down the value factors, the 10 value factors that we looked at earlier. In fact, we only displayed 1 to 7 of the value factors. And then by reference to a series of topics identified in the left-hand column, shows us by a tick the likelihood of those value factors having relevance to the issues identified. Is that right?
Yes, I don't think I'd use the word likelihood. They were the ones that we were scoring, I believe, based upon what's in the left-hand column by the different functional areas of the solution against criteria set by the value factors. And some of those, some of the value factors weren't deemed relevant to the area, hence the lack of a tick.
And for your part of this stream of work, looking at the list down the left-hand side, which of the identified headings and then subheadings were of relevance to you?
I'll be honest, I can't remember whether we just did our own area or whether as a team, I have a feeling as a team, the whole team went through it, but maybe we led on an area. And certainly the popular infrastructure section on there would have been the area that I would have, if you like, led upon.
And that included OP. What does OP stand for?
Okay. So the vision for the programme had a number of services, and one of the services was the Office Platform Service, OPS. Office Platform being, at its simplest, the PC in the office and the devices attached to the PC in the office, and in that case, the middleware, which in this case would have been Riposte. For other suppliers would have been whatever middleware they were proposing.
Just explain to the Chair what middleware is, please. Okay.
Typically, a software system has got a stack of different elements to it. At the top of that stack, you would have applications. At the bottom of the stack, you've got the hardware. Middleware, as it suggests, is what goes in the middle. It tends to be software which provides a technical function, such as a database, or in the case of the pathway solution, a message replication system. It doesn't necessarily have any sort of user interface. The counterclerk user doesn't know they're interacting with it, but it's sitting there providing a vital function.
Okay, so a type of software that provides services to software applications other than the operating system.
Correct. Far better way of putting it, thank you.
WAN, please.
Wide area network.
What's the wide area network?
So the wide area network is what was going to link the individual post offices to whatever central systems the service provider had. So in the pathway case, that was using ISDN in the majority of cases.
TMS, Transaction Management Service.
That was the central systems that the service provider would provide, which in Pathway's case would have included the central correspondence servers and other sort of mainframe type systems behind them.
In order to score these issues listed under POCL infrastructure, that would require the demonstrator team, including you, to be able to judge satisfaction or compliance with the value factors at a detailed technical and granular level. Is that right?
Yes, but that was done by reference to the responses that the service providers gave to the invitation to tender. So they provided each one provided their bids, and they had to respond, I believe, to each individual requirement, and then we had to score those individual requirements.
Thank you. Can we go to paragraph 34 of your witness statement? That is WITN 05970100 at page 11. Page 11, thank you. And paragraph 34. You tell us one key aspect of PFI, Private Finance Initiative, was that requirements had to be presented as high-level, quote, output-based specifications so as not to constrain the service providers. That is, stating the what, but not the how, and at the level of the service rather than a system. This was contrary to most experience, where specifications would be far more detailed and include some how. You're making the point here, is this right, amongst a series of other points, about the effect at this stage of the contract being a PFI?
Yes.
How could the exercise that we've just looked at be undertaken, or how could it be completed without detailed insight into the how?
Well, the requirements were had to be presented as high-level output-based specifications. We weren't allowed to tell them how to do something. The service providers had to respond in their tender documentation and tell us to a level how they were going to meet that requirement. And the purpose of the demonstrator was also that we gained understanding of how it was going to be done. So what we were scoring was their responses to the invitation to tender.
Without knowing what sat underneath the responses?
They had to provide sufficient information in the response for us to be able to score it. That wasn't going to be down at level of detailed design, because obviously at this stage they hadn't done detailed designs, but had to provide adequate information. And if they didn't provide sufficient evidence, then they would have got a low score.
You tell us in paragraph 35, if we continue, the other key aspect of PFI was that of risk transfer. Whilst there was an explicit and well-defined attempt at risk transfer for certain types of benefit payment fraud by the benefits agency, there were, of course, many risks that could not be transferred to a service provider, as POCL has found to its cost over the years. 36, outsourcing a major part of your core business and the transaction processing stroke counter system for a post office is about as core as it gets. Does not remove the risk to that business if the counter system or service does not perform. Paraphrasing somewhat, the ethos was that the risk was transferred to the service provider, and so we should not worry about it. If they failed, it was at their cost. I think this was a fundamental issue. Whatever idea there was of risk transfer in specific areas, POCL still needed assurance in the quality and fitness of the service being developed and provided by the service provider to manage the risk to their business. What you've said there in paragraph 35-36 is said by you in the context of the transfer of fraud risk to ICL Pathway. But does the point apply more broadly, i.e. that ICL Pathway was saying that POCL should not worry about the project because if it failed, then it was at their cost?
Simple answer to that is yes. I can just say 36 wasn't specifically about fraud risk. It was what I was trying to say there was the PFI ethos is all about risk transfer, and what I feel in 36 is that some risks can be transferred. For instance, certain risks regarding benefit encashment were transferred, but the risk that the service provider gets it wrong and screws your business can't be transferred. And that was the whole basis on which we felt in the assurance team, we've jumped forward a bit here, in the assurance team, that we did need to, if you like, know what was in the box. Waiting for the service provider to, get it wrong, and then they'd then take a financial penalty, it wasn't going to help POCL. What we wanted to do was to understand what Pathway were doing and make sure they were doing it in the right way, so that we ended up with a successful solution.
You're saying that ICL Pathways ethos was that that's POCL, should not worry about it. And you're saying this in your statement at a point where the contract was still a PFI one involving the benefits agency. Did the same approach still apply when the benefits agency had pulled out? This was not a PFI contract and was instead a much more standard design and supply contract.
In 1999, bearing in mind I left at the start of 2000, so I don't know how it went after that. In 1999, I think it was still very much in that ethos. I think the key point, though, is if you like, the damage was done by then. Like we'd gone through from when Pathway started work in 1996 through till the point that the contract was renegotiated in the second quarter of 99 under the PFI cloud. And suddenly saying this is not a PFI contract anymore, we didn't suddenly get access to everything that we'd not had access to over those 3 years, and things that may have happened during those 3 years didn't mysteriously go away.
Mr. Beer, if I may, I think I need a 5-minute break.
So, of course, in fact, I fortuitously was about to suggest one because the shorthand writer, the transcribers, have suggested that we should go for an hour or so. So can we...
Well, then, if that's the case, are we having a more traditional break or just 5 minutes?
Just 5 minutes, please, sir.
Fine, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can, thank you.
And we can see and hear you. Can we turn, please, Mr. Folkes, to paragraph 37 of your witness statement, which should be on the screen. You say, as the project progressed, it appeared that the effect of PFI that we were expected by the service provider to treat the underlying solution as a, quote, black box. The service provider's job was to ensure it created the right outputs, but the contents of the box were not available for scrutiny, either how it worked or how it was being built. As I will cover later, this had major effects on POCL's ability to gain assurance on the solution and to inform later activities. This idea here that ICL Pathway expected you and Post Office to treat the system as a black box is one that you return to in the course of your statement. Are you using the term black box there as a term of art, not in the sense that a layman like me might understand it to refer to and only to refer to a flight data recorder or on an aeroplane?
No, it's not the flight data recorder. A black box, I think, is something you can't see inside.
So it's a term of art. Would this be right? I'm going to have another crack at a definition here. It's used in science, computing, and sometimes engineering to refer to a device, system, or object which produces useful information without revealing any information about its internal workings.
Yes, yes.
Is that the sense
What
in which
I was
you're
meaning
referring
here
to black box?
Is the approach that the service provider took was that the solution was a box that we couldn't see inside. It was there to take various inputs, provide various outputs. They had a set of requirements. Their job was to make sure it met the requirements. We weren't permitted to either see how it worked inside that box or how they built the box. I've noticed the word used in another document. It's a matter of transparency. The black box is not transparent.
You say in the last sentence that this, quote, had major effects on POCL's ability to gain assurance on the solution and inform later activities. Why was that?
Okay, so we were set up post-award a contract as a team whose role it was to try and provide design and technical assurance of what Pathway were producing. If you like, to provide an oversight of what Pathway were doing, to provide a good feeling back to the sponsors, or to flag issues back to the sponsors, and to make sure that Pathway didn't head off in the wrong direction for whatever reason. What we found was that Pathway were very reticent to let us actually get hold of information as to how the system worked internally. In particular, denied us access to design documentation. Now, that may have been because such documentation didn't exist. At the time, we assumed it was because they were playing what I call later in the document, the PFI card. They didn't want our interference in it and didn't want to share that documentation with it. Because we couldn't see how it was being produced, how it's going to work internally, we couldn't then go back to the sponsors and say, yes, what Pathway are doing on EPAS or APS or whatever is good and meets our requirements. And what I mean by later activities is we wanted to, we weren't trying to trick Pathway, we were trying to make sure that it was going in the right direction and then make it easier when we got to acceptance to make sure that what had been produced was going to get through acceptance. Obviously, getting to acceptance and not knowing what was inside the box made it far harder to carry out acceptance properly.
Looking back at the matrix that we viewed before the break in Annex C, wouldn't it make it very difficult or impossible to undertake any qualitative analysis of the type required by that exercise?
It would, but bear in mind what what I'm talking about here is the comments on PFI is what happened after award. During the evaluation process and during the demonstrator phase, in particular, the service providers had to produce their responses. We had a mechanism through the risk registers to be able to say, hey, we're worried about this or that. They had to produce documents. If they didn't, it counted against them. So they had a positive incentive to respond to us. Once we got to assurance, they had a positive incentive to go as far as saying obstruct us in some cases.
We'll come on to what you say about ICL pathways obstruction a little later. Can we look at paragraph 38? You say, put informally, the approach seemed to me a case of, trust me, I'm a doctor. Having told them at a high level what we wanted the service to do, we were meant to trust them as the experts to create and run the service. We would have acceptance at the very end, but we would have no visibility of what was in the box or how it had been built, and only be able to perform acceptance based on those output-based specifications. Now, you're obviously saying here that the doctor was ICL Pathway, saying you need to trust us. We're doctors. We're experts in information technology.
Yes.
Did you have this unease at the time, or is this something that you have thought about on reflection 20 years later?
We had an unease during the programme that we were, our job was to do assurance and we couldn't do the job. And we reported this up, and it's documented in a number of places, all the way up to the top level decisions, that we'd not be able to get assurance on the state of the project.
And when you say reported up to the top level decision, you mean to the POCL board?
I can't say it was to the POCL board. I haven't had access to everything they did, but certainly if you look at the documents from middle of 1999 around acceptance, there's statements in there around the lack of assurance that we've been able to get. And that's the culmination of what we've been trying to do from 1996, 7 all the way through. And if I can just say, our intention was not to try and, trick people. We all wanted this thing to get through. What we wanted to do was to get assurance as to the direction in which they were going. And in cases where we were allowed access, I think generally we came away with quite a good feeling on a number of them. And some of that was around some of the deep technical infrastructure. It was the areas where we didn't have access that it appears that we may not have got access potentially because there were problems in those areas.
Is that why you explain them playing the PFI card?
Yes.
And what do you mean by playing the PFI card?
What I mean that in a number of cases where we tried to get access to documentation, the answer would always come back, no, it's PFI, it's not appropriate for you to have that. As we heard from Terry Austin, it wasn't appropriate for the contract or whatever the words he used. The contract, I think part of the problem here was the contract didn't support us getting this level of visibility. The service provider could have given it to us, but chose not to. Which is why in my statement I do say I think in a way the way the contract was put together was the cause of some of these problems.
You've described it as sorry, that can come down, that witness statement now. You've described it as playing the PFI card, which has a pejorative element to it, as opposed to doing that which is required under the PFI contract. Why do you say that they were, quote, playing the PFI card?
I say that because it was blocking the task that we were trying to do, and that we, by the nature of our roles, were tasked to do. I think Pathway could have made documentation available to us, could have involved us more, could have been more open and transparent with it, but they, in a number of areas, forcefully did block access. It didn't just seem to be a passive thing, it seemed to be actively preventing access, which is why I used the language I did there.
Can we go back to the evaluation stage and look at poll 00028152, please? Looking at the front page, this is the evaluation team's final report, dated the 28th of April 1996. Did you see this at the time?
I can't remember whether I did or not.
Okay.
So there were parts of it that our work went into, but I can't remember whether I actually had a copy of this at the time.
Can we turn to page 15, please? And look at the bottom of the page, please. Under value assessment and the financial results. The process is described, the treatment of value factors, including weightings and sensitivities, analyses to be applied to the scores in the evaluation, is described in a paper. This paper was agreed by the procurement board late last year and lodged with the programme lawyers prior to receipt to tenders. And then if we continue, please. If we look at paragraph 7.2, please. That's on page 17. Thank you. The scores resulting from the assessment are shown below. The layout reflects the pre-tender agreement that the factors will be categorised either as characteristics or viability. Viability would consider the soundness of the essential services in terms of the internals of the service delivery, while characteristics would look at the more external factors affecting the potential success of the services. You didn't give these scores, is that right?
No. These scores came from an overall scoring process which the whole team produced, and then they went through a process of weightings, etc., to actually be racked up to this level.
And if we just quickly look down at the three service providers there, we can see in relation to the 10 value factors that we looked at, do you remember, in Annex C? The first of them, customer acceptability, Pathways the joint lowest, flexibility, Pathways the middle, reliability and support, Pathways the lowest, innovation, it's the middle of the three, as with staff agent acceptability, and then viability, fraud-free method of payments, Pathways the lowest, credibility of delivery, Pathways the lowest, management capability, Pathways the lowest, startup, Pathways the lowest, stability and coherence, Pathways the lowest. Is that right? You remember that at the time, do you?
I don't remember the exact scores, but I remember that shape of things, yes.
And then over the page, please. We'll skip over that figure and look at the table where weightings are applied to the scores that have just been given. And we can see that under characteristics, Pathway comes bottom, and under viability, Pathway comes bottom. Yes?
That's what it says, yes.
Yeah. And then can we go to page 21, please? This is analysis and conclusion. There's a list of people there who are said to have considered the results of the evaluation and reach a conclusion. I don't think you're one of them. Is that right, that you didn't participate in this?
Oh, correct, yes. This was at considerably higher up the food chain than I was allowed to be.
But you contributed data on which this group of people made their decision?
Yes, the scores that we did and the risks that we produced went into that process. And Tony Johnson, who's on that list there, he was, I believe, managing the demonstrator. He was a representative of the demonstrator stream.
And then if we look at 9.3, the group considered the results from the various streams of activity, contracts assurance review, ranked the suppliers in the order of pathway, I think top, IBM, then Cardlink. And in the last sentence there in A, pathway should be preferred to IBM unless IBM's bid offered a considerable price advantage. Financial evaluation. This had shown IBM with the lowest cost of service, but with pathway sufficiently close for the two to be regarded as virtually equal. And then the value factor, that's the thing we've just looked at. A close match between the three suppliers in terms of external factors, the order within that being Card, Link, IBM and Pathway, that's Pathway bottom, on internal factors covering the soundness in terms of service delivery, stability and coherence, fraud-free method of payment. The order was again Card, Link, IBM and Pathway, with the first two being significantly ahead of the third. And then over the page, please. If we just go to the conclusion at 9.9. So in the light of what's been said, that we've just read, the group unanimously decided that the contract should be awarded to Pathway. Can we just go back to 9.7, please? The group recognised that an award to Pathway would imply a need for a proactive management stance by sponsors, notwithstanding the improvement noted by the contracts stream since the restructuring immediately prior to invitation to tender issue. It would also require sponsor staff to work closely with Pathway on fraud prevention measures, although given the changes on fraud risk made by the other two bidders in their retenders, most of this work was likely to be required whichever supplier was chosen. Whilst acknowledging the implications of selecting Pathway, the group considered this was a far preferable prospect to the consequences of awarding to IBM in the unlikely event of their being regarded as PFI compliant, given IBM's stance on fraud, risk transfer and other factors, most notably limited liability. What do you understand what the phrase proactive management stance means?
I think it meant what we were trying to do, and within the assurance team, and what we have to say in some way failed to do because we weren't allowed to or were blocked doing it.
Was it possible to take a proactive management stance under a PFI when the service, excuse me, supplier said, "Trust me, I'm a doctor. You can't see what's in the black box or how we've designed it"?
I think it would be very difficult to. I think when I read this, and I don't know whether I had previously seen this document or not, but it did strike me as ironic that the problems that we had, and to be honest, suffered for at least 2 years in the period, sort of 97 to 99, in trying to do assurance, was kind of, I think, flagged up here as, well, you're going to need to do more of this. And I think there was my view when I was working on this was looking at this end of the statement is there should have been more support from up on high within BA and POCL to make sure that we were able to do our task, and whether that required a different contract or a better contract, something done to actually enable us to manage the risk that's in here.
Was it communicated to you that in the light of the award of the contract to Pathway, there needed to be a proactive management stance in the future?
I have no recollection of that.
By that, do you mean that it may have happened, but you now do not remember, or more positively?
I'm sure I would have remembered if there had been a meeting to say, we're going to give it to Pathway, but hey guys, we're going to need to set something special up to manage them. My understanding was, we got to the end of the evaluation phase, all this took place, and then people transitioned on to the assurance phase. So I don't remember any, and I've got no record of any process, meetings, whatever, that said, because it's Pathway, we need to do X.
Thank you. That can come down. Can we look, please, at WITN 05970100, your witness statement, at page 22, please. Page 22. And it's paragraph 66. You say, my understanding from reading document, and you quote it, that's the document I've just shown you, is that Pathway were the only one of 3 service providers who were considered to be PFI compliant regarding fraud risk transfer to BA. The other 2 service providers were not PFI compliant. Ironically, of course, BA then withdrew from the project in 98-99, rendering this factor of the decision rather irrelevant. Now, I think what you're doing there, you're referring to the fact that an important factor in awarding ICL the contract was the non-compliance of the other 2 service providers, in particular in relation to fraud risk transfer.
Yes.
The irony that you're referring to, when you say ironically, of course, would this be right? A twofold irony. Firstly, the benefits agency then withdrew in 1999, so the risk of fraud on the benefits agency was no longer a relevant consideration.
Precisely, yes.
And secondly, this was no longer a PFI contract in 1999, and therefore the extent to which either of the 2 failed bidders were PFI compliant was in 1999 now irrelevant.
I hadn't, when I wrote paragraph 66, thought of that aspect for the simple reason that by the time we got to 1999, again, as I said before, the damage was done. We got to the system as it was at that point, and deciding this wasn't PFI anymore wasn't going to change the way in which Pathway had behaved over the previous 3 years.
I want to ask you about that. Can you recall whether any thought was given in spring 99, perhaps up until May 99, after the benefits agency withdrew, and these 2 points that I've mentioned carry no weight, as to whether the process of letting the contract to Pathway should be undertaken again, given what we've read about of ICL Pathway's weaknesses on technical risks?
There were, I believe, many discussions that went on as to whether the removal of themselves by BA meant that the project should stop or go on, or how it would go on. These were well above my level of discussion, but there were, I believe, from what I have read, all the way up into government discussions as to whether the project should go ahead or not.
I'll put it another way. In the documents that we've read, ICL Pathway and its bid suffered from, over time, an assessment by POCL of serious and sustained technical risks. Was thought given to pressing the reset button to say, look, it got over the line pathway because of the strength of its contractual provisions, where the other two failed bidders failed. We now need to undertake a fundamental reassessment, given what we know, albeit some of it's obscured by the black box, of the technical risks of the ICL Pathway programme.
I'm not aware that there were discussions of reassessing the pathway solution at that point. There were certainly discussions as to whether the project should go ahead or not. But bear in mind, at this point, whilst the benefits agents were extracting themselves, POCL and Pathway were, heading towards, trying to get towards acceptance and trialling, etc. The efforts that were going on the project at that point, I think, were primarily towards that rather than a fundamental reappraisal. I believe that we, the Post Office, missed a trick by not modifying the contract in some way that forced us to be able to get hold of everything that we hadn't been able to do before.
We'll come to the possible missing of the trick a little later, possibly this afternoon. Can I turn to your fourth role then? That's your involvement in the development and assurance of the Horizon system after the award of the contract to Pathway in April and May 1996. You explain in your witness statement, is this a fair summary, that this part of the project was within POCL arranged in a similar manner to the demonstrator phase, with teams being allocated to specific areas within the project, and you were allocated the POCL infrastructure aspect just as before?
Correct. So the one difference is at that point the support services part, I think there was a separate group who were going to deal with implementation and rollout, and I think they took on issues, consideration of anything to do with the rollout side. So at that point, POCL infrastructure was the technical side of the infrastructure rather than including the support services.
Thank you. Can we turn up WITN 05970100? This is your witness statement. And can we turn to page 24, please? And if we just look at paragraphs 72 and 73, you say, as you remember it, your role in assurance was to try and monitor the development of the service to gain increasing confidence of the emerging pathway solution, to assure its performance stroke security, whilst also trying to support them by providing access to resources in BA or POCL where needed. Admittedly, that was more relevant for the applications teams. 73, in addition to de-risking the project and facilitating the flow of information, we were also mindful of the fact that eventually there'd need to be both a contractual acceptance of the solution stroke services and release authorization decisions, and that gaining confidence and knowledge throughout the process should make this simpler. Basically, it was a means of avoiding surprises downstream. In relation to the activities that you described there, is it right that you set up a technical assurance forum?
We did. We tried a number of different approaches. The technical assurance forum was one of them. The intention of the technical assurance forum was to try and give some structure, because we were being criticised by, I think, for wanting access to everything. So we tried to have a more structured approach to it.
Who was criticising you?
That was criticism coming from people who were trying to access within Pathway.
They were saying you're seeking too much information from us.
Yes.
You say elsewhere in your witness statement that Pathway refused to disclose design documentation to you, and that the Pathway management obstructed access to documentation and sometimes cancelled meetings.
Yes.
Did that happen at this stage?
Yes.
And is that why you use the word obstruction by ICL Pathway?
Yes, but more generally in that we found that at a working level, if we get contact to individual engineers or individual managers of areas, they would generally be helpful. When we tried to get hold of, for instance, formal copies of documentation or access to stuff, either it was denied to us, well, it was denied to us either because it was deemed not appropriate, or in some cases we believe probably it doesn't exist. But.
And so was the Technical Assurance Forum an attempt to find your way through this obstruction?
Yes.
Can we look, please, at WITN 0597 0138? These are the terms of reference for the Technical Assurance Forum, and you can see they're dated the 9th of December 1998. I think this is a document that you co-authored with a Mr. Long, is that right?
Yes.
Was he from ICL Pathway?
He was from ICL Pathway, and he was the sort of contact partner I had at that point for this work.
I think it's right that the Technical Assurance Forum had already met a number of times before these terms of reference were drawn up, because I think we've got some agendas for some previous meetings that predate the 9th of December 1998. Would that sound about right?
As I said, we went through a number of different approaches to doing this. So quite possibly, yes, we had met beforehand, and as part of that, it was, okay, we want to formalise this. December 1998 being quite late in the process, so that's why I think this wasn't. There are other papers, I think, that I referred to in the witness statement of slightly earlier approaches towards this.
If we look at the same time, WITN 0597 0129. We can see an agenda for a Technical Assurance Forum. It's the second meeting, meeting 2, and it's dated the 30th of September 1998. So a couple of months before the terms of reference document. But you were, I think, saying that there were a number of approaches that you tried to take to find a pathway through this.
Correct.
Okay, we can just look at the document on the left-hand side, please. And can we look at page 2 of the document, please? And read the background at paragraph 2. One of the responsibilities of the Product Assurance Group within the POCL Horizon programme is to make a recommendation to the Release Authorisation Board for each release of pathway service as to the fitness for purpose of that release for its intended environment. One of the viewpoints for this recommendation is from the technical assurance angle, and in particular covering the, as opposed to functionality, characteristics of the service in 4 key areas, namely performance and scalability, integrity, service availability and resilience, and security. What does integrity mean in this context?
Integrity, I would take in this case to basically mean that what data comes in is correctly processed and comes out without being modified, without being destroyed, and so on. So
reliability and credibility.
I would say reliability of the service is does it work consistently over time? Integrity is, is it, sorry, it's a sort of word I use all the time. I can't think of the best way of describing it. Integrity, is there a clear trail from the data that goes into the data that comes out the other end? Is it immutable? Is it reliably going to be processed? So I've got a mental block on the wording around it.
Yeah, that's right, thank you. You say in your witness statement, the cross-reference is paragraph 76, A, B and C, that, and you cross-refer us to documents that you wrote in July 97, January 98 and May 1998. I'm not going to ask you about those, but instead ask you some more general questions. We can take this document down now. You were still operating under a PFI contract at this time?
Correct.
Given that you were still operating under a PFI contract, where the supplier was saying that so long as the outcomes would be delivered in accordance with the requirements of POCL, POCL need not worry, why did you nonetheless engage in this technical assurance process?
The trite answer to that is because it was my job to. The probably more useful answer to that is because to try and assure the success of the project, we believed that we needed to have visibility of what Pathway were doing. And that included not just the functional characteristics, but also the technical characteristics, how it behaved. And to understand that we wanted and needed visibility of the design, and that we needed visibility of things like how they'd analyse failure conditions, etc.
I think you reference those kind of answers in a document that you wrote back in July 97. I wonder whether we could look, please, at WITN 0597 0113. This is written by you under the authority of Mr. Meager.
Marr. John Marr, he is, not Meager.
Thank you very much. Dated the 23rd, I think, or perhaps 22nd of July 1997.
Yes.
And you'll see the title of it, The Level of Information Needed for Technical Assurance, a Discussion Paper. And if we can go forward to page 3, please. Under the heading, The Need for Technical Assurance, you set out some of the key reasons for assurance under 5 bullet points to minimise the risk to sponsors. Major significant business/political risks are still owned by the contracting authorities, that's POCL and BA at that time, and contractual remedies are not sufficient to mitigate the effects of failure of the Pathway service. To ensure compatibility between various suppliers' solutions, the end-to-end solution includes services provided by Pathway and a variety of other organisations. To control solution drift, and I think a separate paper was written about that. To enable acceptance, a number of the requirements relate to attributes of the service rather than business functionality. And to inform the release authorisation process. We need to have an adequate understanding of the solution to be able to make an informed decision on the fitness of a release. Do those 5 points, in the way that I've summarised them at some speed, set out the reasons why you nonetheless engaged in a technical assurance process?
Yes, I think those are good.
To what extent was that process necessary as a part of the route to acceptance?
Do you mean by that if we'd gone away for 2 years and come back and waited for acceptance specifications and ticked them off?
Yes.
I think point 4, we need to understand the solution to be able to inform the acceptance process. ICL Pathway had to produce acceptance specifications, i.e. how they were going to meet a number of these requirements. Without knowledge of the solution, we couldn't really evaluate those acceptance criteria. You know, if they said, you know, requirement 1, 2, 3 was going to be met by it being green, you know, what would that mean if we didn't understand, you know, what was underneath it? What we were trying to do here is get to the stage where we understood enough so that acceptance could be done, and that acceptance could be done not just with the functional characteristics, which are maybe fairly easy to do, but for some of these non-functional ones.
The third point is, how did what you were trying to achieve here sit with ICL Pathway, given the provisions of the PFI contract and their approach to carrying them into effect on the ground?
Badly, I think, is the answer to that. Like we tried through these various papers and various approaches to the pathway to engage with them, both this one in 1997 and then the paper you had at the end of 1998. But I think Pathway's approach was, you know, they were head down trying to do the job, and I think very much they viewed us as a distraction.
Can we look at your witness statement, please? WITN 05970100. At page 27. You say in paragraph 80, rather perversely, we did make some progress on the POCL infrastructure side. I say perversely, as you might expect that the deeper into the software stack, the furthest from the application, the more reticent they might be. But the opposite seemed true, with Pathway people providing informal access to a document known as the Technical Environment Description, the TED. This technical infrastructure area was making progress and did not expose major problems, which might explain why the people here were more open. We also had more success in the underlying security areas, as we had a specific requirement which required Pathway to create a security functional specification, SFS. So there you're pointing out a perversity that you're diving deep into a software stack. You might expect resistance, but you didn't get it.
Correct.
Can we contrast that with what you say in paragraph 82? In other areas, however, in particular the POCL application side, there was explicit refusal to allow access to design documentation for much of the time. I suspect this was largely because such documentation did not exist at the time, or that it was of such quality that opening it up to us would have exposed Pathway in this area. What do you mean by reference to your reference to the POCL application side?
Okay, so POCL applications included EPOS, APS, the Automated Payment Service. It included BES, which was the Benefit Encashment Service, which was part of the overall Benefit Payment Service, but the bit that ran on the counter. So POCL applications were those three at the time. I think then MFS was added to it. But
you say that explicit refusal to allow access was what you were met with.
Yes.
What was the reason that was given for this refusal to allow access?
I believe it was the, not appropriate under the contract, the what I call the PFI card.
You say that you suspect that this was essentially a front. Is that right? Because the document did not exist or was of poor quality?
That's what I suggest there, yes.
On what basis do you hold that belief, or did you hold that belief?
Partly because it seemed very odd that in some areas we were getting access, and what we saw was fairly good in the areas where we, for instance, the document, the TED, the applications, we had more resistance. I say this, I suspect, is largely because what we've learned since, in particular around EPOS, and what I think is backed up by certain documents that the inquiry gave me yesterday in Appendix E, says precisely this.
That the documentation didn't exist, or it was of low quality?
Yes, regarding what's in the EPOS task force document and the CSR audit documents that I was showed me yesterday, so it seems to say precisely this.
We'll come to that this afternoon, the EPOS, but just to summarise what you're saying is you've now been shown some internal ICL pathway analysis of difficulties that they were encountering with the EPOS system. Is that right?
Yes. But it does mention in those documents the absence of design documentation and the fact that some documentation had to be reverse engineered from what had been written after the event. Therefore wouldn't have existed at the time that we were referring to here.
Can I turn to the effect of what all of this meant, the consequences, and look at paragraph 84 of your witness statement, please, which is over the page. You say the result was that, except in areas where we had an explicit right in the contract to such a document, we only had limited or partial visibility of the emerging pathway systems or of their design and development approach. This meant we could not gain confidence of what pathway were creating, or its suitability or fitness for purpose, or have confidence in how pathway were developing, and therefore what quality mechanisms were in place. So you, summarising, you say you couldn't see what they were creating, and you couldn't therefore have confidence in how they were developing the system. Is that right?
Correct.
You obviously knew that that was a problem at the time. Is that right?
We suspected that we knew that the lack of visibility we were getting was impeding our work on assurance. We obviously didn't know what the outcome was that going to be. If you take the view that it was Pathway's responsibility and that there was their responsibility to have the right controls in place, you could say the effect of all that would be zero, because they should have got on and done it. What we came out with at the end of the process in 1999 was we didn't have evidence to have confidence in the system at that point.
And just before the break then, you, I think, recorded some of this at the time. Can we look, please, at WITN 0597 0118? I think this is a document that you wrote at the time, is that right?
Yes.
In your statement, you tell us that it dates from 1998. Can you be any more precise than that?
I can't, at the moment, without, unless it's within the... Can I just check what WITN number this is?
118.
According to page 2, it was the 1st of October 1998.
I saw that in the index. Where did that date come from?
That, I believe, was the date on the file.
Okay, so the properties of the document.
Yes.
Thank you. And who was this addressed to?
I believe this was a document I produced for discussion within the product assurance team.
And so who would it have gone to within the product assurance team?
The team was led by John Marr, and there were a number of other members of the team, and I presume it would have been circulated within that team.
Do you know whether the document was ever escalated above Mr. Meyer?
I presume it was discussed, but I don't know.
Looking at the first section, assurance versus issues management, you say our role is assurance, but up to now we've had very little opportunity to do more than manage issues as they come up. In the absence of Pathway's cooperation on assurance across the board and the ability to engage in proper review activities, the V&V, what do you mean by V&V?
Validation and verification.
We are not going to be able to provide the assurance that sponsors expect. We end up giving Pathway false credibility and doing ourselves no favours if we give the impression of assurance. Pathway see little benefit in overall assurance. They choose to involve us when it suits them, but consistently fail to provide long-term access. If they refuse access, what happens? Do we have any leverage? In effect, we have no clout. What does no assurance mean in the end? So either we have to achieve the coverage depth that we require to provide a credible level of assurance, or we stop pretending that we can do it and revert to issues management as our prime role. A decent level of assurance is only going to come from high level, Dave Miller and above, pressure on Pathway as a condition for signing up to yet another plan as a risk minimisation action. The little local agreement approach is doomed. Does that accurately reflect how you felt at the time as part of this assurance process?
I think it does, yes. And the comment at the end, the local agreement approach, I think by that I meant, us trying and to, talk nicely to, I think it probably would have been Terry Austin or whoever at that point, wasn't really getting anywhere. The only way that we were going to move this forward is if we had actually support from the top of the programme.
That is referred to in some of the documentation and in your witness statement as informal access to information and informal access to some documents. Is that right? The little local agreement?
Well, in some cases, and in particular on the more technical side, we did get, for instance, informal access to this document called the TED. What I would have wanted at that point was a controlled copy of the TED, so if it got updated, that we saw those updates. There's not much point in assuring a document and it changing 6 months later. What the little local agreement approach is saying that for some documents we just did not get access, and that continuing to apply pressure wasn't going to give us what we needed at that level.
And after lunch, can we turn to what the little local agreement and the informal access was showing you? Is that an appropriate moment, sir? Sir, you're on mute.
Sorry, 2:10, all right with everyone?
Yes, thank you very much, sir. You should give Mr. Folks the warning.
I'm sure you're aware of it.
Yes.
But you shouldn't discuss your evidence with anyone over lunch. I imagine that's the last thing you want to do anyway.
Correct.
Thank you very much.
See you at 2:10.
Thank you.